The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, hi everybody, wherever you are. Welcome to this very short, sharp session. We're just going to look at the concept of team identity, and in particular, what the three characteristics of team identity are, and perhaps going a step back, what is team identity? So welcome wherever you are. Hopefully I'm coming across loud and clear. There is so much pressure on this whole online community now. Anything could go on. So let's just plow through and see how we go. And it wouldn't matter what platform you're using. People are using these technologies, obviously, manyfold, and it's putting pressure on the system. Having said that, let's enjoy ourselves. Just take 30 minutes out of our busy schedule and our chaotic life, and just to have a little understanding about what this whole notion of team identity is all about. Obviously, this comes out of a book that I'm publishing hopefully later this year, although everything's on hold now, as you can see on your screen there. But I'm very interested in the concept of team identity, and hopefully I can give you something very practical that you can take away and use. The other thing I'll do here, of course, is I'll give you a copy of the slides and the recording. So the very fact that you've taken the trouble to register today, I'm going to give you an opportunity to get a copy of the slides and the recording as well. So hopefully I'll post that out sometime this afternoon. So just relax and enjoy. And of course, at any time you've got any questions, the best way to do this, and I can't unmute you all, you can understand, is if you go to the question box on the right-hand side, you open up that little box, it'll give you an opportunity to type in a message. As soon as you type that message in, I actually get that message. And what I'll do, of course, is respond to it immediately. I won't be leaving a 5-minute awkward pause at the end for you to collect your thoughts around what questions you want to ask. Just ask them whenever you're ready to go. Okay, so let's move into what I'm covering. So essentially, I want to start with looking at the concept of team identity. What is it? And it's important that we get it clear what I actually mean by identity. Let's actually look at what the three characteristics of team identity are. And this comes from good, reputable research. And I've actually adapted it a little bit and changed the names and given them a little bit more of a creative bend, if you like. And perhaps let's talk about some strategies, some things that you can do in order to create a stronger team identity, which is in your interests, but it's also, of course, in the interests of your team and, I should say, the organisation from where you're from. So let's have a look at what we mean by team identity. So what is it essentially? So you can see on the screen there, I'll just make a couple of key points about it. So team identity refers to the extent to which its members identify with the team. So if you've got a team that's part of an organisation, the degree to which your team members identify with your team as distinct from the organisation of which the team is part of would be a very good indicator of team identity. In other words, I identify with that team rather than I identify with being part of this organisation. And then people say, well, in that organisation, what do you do? Oh, I do this and I'm part of that team. They're probably likely to talk about the team first. So that's a good indicator. Now, why is that important? Well, the stronger a team identity, the more its members connect with the team's ethos. All right, so if you've got a team that are on board, they connect with the ethos, then they're likely to basically follow that ethos, whatever that might be. But a compelling team identity results in its members readily associating with their team before, as I said, the organisation at large. Now, team identity does not mean team cohesion, and I think that's a very important point. I'll just go back a slide there before I move on. So when people talk about team identity, they often think that this means that the team have harmonious relationships with each team member. Now, that can often be a byproduct of team identity, but it's not to be confused with it. So cohesion is a different sort of concept, and so I can, don't get that confused with the concept of team identity. So here's my team identity model, and as you can see, you've got there three basic characteristics of team identity. And what I'll do is I'll run through and I'll define for you what those three are. And as I said earlier, it comes from research and, looking at teams and successful teams. So it is true to say a successful team, or a high-performing team, as we like to call it, usually has a very strong team identity. And the question that we want to ask is, well, what does the leader do? I mean, what can a leader do to create this identity? Of course, like most things, you can go overboard, and too strong a team identity can be unproductive, and a weak team identity can also be unproductive. So it's kind of like, it's a bit of a balancing act to get it right. But ultimately, you can see that there are three basic characteristics. There's buffering, bridging, and building. Now, they weren't originally called that in the research, but I just thought it might make it a little bit more memorable, if you like, if we start with the three Bs. So I'll talk about each of those, go into some detail, and then ultimately I'll talk about what you can actually do to give expression, if you like, to these three characteristics. All right, so let's start with buffering. I realise there's a bit of a delay on your screen, and there we go, it's up on your screen now, which is great. So let's talk about this concept of buffering. So buffering, and of course in IT world it can mean a different thing perhaps, but ultimately what I mean by buffering is, buffering involves protecting your team or the team resources that you have from unwanted outside influence, distraction, or interference. Now, I'm sure that you are a team leader in some respect, and you know that there are impositions that are put on your team on a regular basis. Some of those impositions, of course, are part and parcel of what should happen in life, and part and parcel of what should happen in your organisation. But there are other impositions that occur which are actually quite destructive to the team. So getting the balance right is really important. Now, it's not about blocking everything out, of course. That's not exactly what that means. So, but if you don't exercise buffering as a leader, then what actually happens is that other teams and individuals can easily cannibalize your team's resources. Now, when I talk about resources, I'm talking about resources that are human, which are people, of course. So getting people to attend mindless meetings that are not even relevant to helping the team or even the organisation. You've got administrative resources, which could be imposing ridiculous amounts of red tape and unnecessary paperwork on the team. Or it could be technical resources such as computers and desktops and things like that, where people might sort of see that somebody's left and they decide that, hello, there's a laptop or something that we can use for our team, because obviously that team doesn't need it, when in actual fact you've got a person coming in who you've just recruited into that role next week. So these are the things. So if you don't actually buffer, the team is likely to be cannibalized, and of course that's not of anyone's interest at all. Of course, there's all sorts of justification about why people should have these resources, of course, but a good team leader will fight the good fight around their turf, because if you don't to some degree protect your team, then obviously what's going to happen is you will be open to this cannibalization. So, of course, you can go too far with all of these things. And obviously, if you buffer too much, then you're going to be sort of considered to be an empire builder, and you'll be seen to be, not ultimately working in the best interest of the organisation. So let's go to the next. Well, first of all, let me give you some examples around buffering, or perhaps what we might talk about is in outside intrusion, some practical examples so that you understand what I mean. I'm not saying all these examples might be negative or all of these, but just to give you an idea. So, you've got a short staff team exerts pressure on your team to try to redeploy an individual in that team to another team. All right, so that So they might have a justification for that. They say they're short term. Can we have one of your team members for the duration of this project? Now, in some circumstances, that would be very valid and reasonable. I'm not suggesting that. But in other cases, of course, it may not be. And so that would be a human resource example of where the leader might need to buffer. Or perhaps a project team working in a matrix organisation. And of course, a matrix organisation is where you've essentially got two bosses. You've got your boss, who is a functional boss, and you've also part of a project team. So in these sorts of organisations, buffering is extremely important. So the project manager working in this matrix organisation organise a functional team member to attend several time-wasting project meetings. And so what they're doing, of course, is restricting the capacity of the functional team to get its work done. So there's another human resource. So it would be quite within your rights as a leader of the team to ask questions about the validity of that meeting and, you know, what benefits there are, not just for the individual attending the meeting, but also how it's going to impact positively on your team. It's perfectly okay. That's a buffering exercise. What about excessive administrative procedures that suffocate a team in red tape and bureaucracy? And it's all been done under the guise of accountability or transparency. I'm sure you've seen many examples of that. And it's perfectly valid for the team leader at that point, regardless of how senior you are in the organisation, to ask the questions about the relevance of this bureaucracy and how it's actually helping your team improve its own efficiency and effectiveness. Because remember, some people that impose that on your team really aren't thinking, and they're not mindful of the impact that it's going to have on your team, and that's obviously got an impact. What about a manager who takes possession of what they believe is a so-called spare computer to suit their team members' purposes? That could be also a case where you jump in and buffer. So you can probably gather that to some degree, the concept of buffering is important for the health of your team. What about bridging? Now, whereas buffering is both an internal and external focus, bridging is the exact it's not the exact opposite. Bridging is an external focus. So bridging's the opposite. So ultimately, bridging, while buffering pretty much is an internal defense mechanism to shield your team, bridging actually involves you reaching out to key stakeholders and alliances and individuals beyond the team. Because obviously a team needs to use resources both inside the organisation and also external to the organisation. And if a team doesn't do this well, of course, then they often are left out of communication loops. There is uncooperative behaviour that can occur. This can occur regardless, but so bridging is about ensuring that there's good, healthy working relationships between your team and other teams in the organisation and beyond. Having a constructive working relationship is critical. Bridging strengthens alliances, and obviously that's really important. So you see you've got these, so on the one hand you want a buffer, but on the other hand you want a bridge. So you've actually got these two dynamics working together, and so they are extremely important in managing team identity. So and then the third one there, building. Now building is an internal. So what building is about is actually looking at building a culture that's unique to your team that actually contributes to the well-being of your team. Now, any team, regardless of how high performing or otherwise it is, has its own culture. The question you've got to ask is the culture actually benefiting the team or not? That's the question. So building involves cultivating a sustainable and productive team culture. So it's about harnessing things like the diversity in the team. It's about streamlining your systems and processes to make sure that they are actually functioning to improve efficiency and effectiveness. It's about promoting continuous learning and building blocks for a robust team culture. So all of those things are critical. Like buffering, unlike buffering, building is an internally focused mechanism. Now, but unlike buffering, where the energy is devoted to keeping at bay external influences, building activities are definitely directed to attracting the energies and enterprises of the resources within your team. So shared leadership, for example, is a critically important aspect of building. So drawing and drawing on the skills and the capabilities and experience of your team members would be a classic building strategy. All right, so in contrast to bridging, which is reaching out, building is really using the internal resources to the best of your ability in the team. All right, so you come back to the model that I shared with you before. You can see that in the inner circle there, we've got, obviously I've covered these, you've got buffering, bridging, and building, right? So they're the three. Now, and the next circle beyond that, what I've attempted to do is to identify 8 strategies, or perhaps we might call them elements of a high-performing team. And you might say, well, where did you get that information from? From my own reading and looking at the literature around high-performing teams, and I guess from my own observations as well. You've got these things. Now, I don't think any of them will surprise you, but what I've done is I've categorized them around the 3 team identity characteristics. So let's go through those and have a look at them, because this gives you a little bit more sense of what you can do in relation to this. So let's go through and have a look. So you've got here, so if we start at the top there at 12 o'clock, if you have a look there, you've got 3 for buffering. So by building a sense of trust in your team so that people feel comfortable sharing information with you, people feel comfortable supporting each other, by doing that, you are creating some degree of, what would be the word? So I guess resilience. Yeah, that's the word I'm looking for. So you are creating some resilience so that the team is less likely to be fractured when you have unwanted external interferences. So that's important. Sharing the leadership, as I said earlier, is about making sure that your meetings are not just reporting processes, that you actually share the knowledge and share the way that you can do things. And if you can create that sort of environment, then of course, again, that does in some senses buffer yourself from the external forces that might come into play. And ultimately, of course, it's about being agile. And of course, in the crisis we're going through at the moment, agility obviously is essential. So we're in a time in our history where we've just got to tap dance, and by being able to tap dance, of course, the team is buffering itself from some of the external threats that might try to undermine the team. So there are 3 characteristics of that, just to make sense of that. These are the strategies that I was talking about earlier. So folks, at any stage, if you've got questions, comments, observations, please don't hesitate to share, because I'm more than happy to have a look at those. So let's go to bridging. Now, of course, bridging is an external energy focus. So it's all about bridging alliances with external stakeholders. It's all about building alliances, building understanding, communication, and all the rest of it. The interesting thing is, if you look at a team and you mapped all your stakeholders, the truth of the matter is there's probably only about, pick a number, 4 or 5 key stakeholders that are absolutely vital to your team's success. One of the obvious ones, of course, would be your boss. Now, without your boss on side and working with you, then you're going to be in a bit of strife in your team. So So that would be one relationship that needs to be nurtured, and there'll be other ones there as well. So I've picked down 2 things that I think you could do pretty much in your own team in order to exercise the bridging characteristic. One of those is to create a purpose. So the question that I ask is, why does your team exist? Now, you might say, well, that's a fairly basic question, but the real question at the heart of that is, does your team members know why your team exists? Have you talked to them about that? Because a team that's got a very clear focus and purpose obviously then is in a position to be able to communicate to the key stakeholders and resources it needs beyond the team. But of course, if you don't have a clear focus, or if people have got a skewed focus, then of course we spend a lot of time attending meetings that we shouldn't and all the rest. So that's step 1. Nothing wrong with you having a conversation with your team about that. Why do we exist? What's our prime purpose? And then the second thing about that, of course, is for your team to manage those stakeholders. Now, you might think, well, you know, I'm the team leader, so surely I should be doing that. Not necessarily. Some people in your team may have very good working relationships with other key stakeholders, and perhaps you might delegate that. Of course, you know, ultimately you, as the leader of the team, may have a need to, you know, jump in at certain points, but there's no reason why you shouldn't be sharing the managing of stakeholders. Now, here's a very simple thing to do. Get your team together, get a whiteboard out, and just put a circle in the center and put your team, and then ultimately ask the team members, who are all your stakeholders, and build it up. And once you feel you've exhausted that, then ask questions around. Simple, empowering question is, you know, you might also rate those stakeholder relationships on a scale of 1 to 5. You know, 5 meaning it's great, we work really well with that team or that individual. A 4 means there's room for improvement, and so forth. That's the first step. That would be interesting. And then the second thing you could ask is, well, what can we do to build even better working relationships with our core stakeholders? And so it gives the team a complete focus. And so bridging might be an example where you're working with your team to do that. Now, that's bridging. Now, the other side of it, of course, is the building, which is the internal focus about building a team culture that's efficient and effective. And you can see there are 3 characteristics around that. One of those characteristics, of course, is improving systems. So, you know, you might say, well, where do I start? You know, I haven't got much time, and, you know, the place to start is where the majority of your time and your team time is spent. And those systems are the systems that would be scrutinised first and foremost, because clearly you're going to get a better return on investment. If you're using, excuse me, if you're using certain systems on a regular basis, then obviously they're the places to start. So that's one thing you can do. Another thing you can do is just to recognise that diversity does not mean necessarily ethnic diversity or gender diversity. I mean, those things could be relevant. It could be age and experience. It could also be new and old, so people that are new to the team versus people that have been there for a long time. The other thing that I think is often unheard of or unspoken about is diversity of thinking. All of us think in certain ways, and often we get very frustrated when other people don't think like we do. But ultimately, we can harness that to our advantage. And there's a whole lot of tools out there that you can use to work that out. And then, of course, and it's a bit of a sort of a cliche phrase, but any team that's a high-performing team is a team that learns continuously. So learning from mistakes, reviewing projects, considering how customers are dealt with, considering a lot of things, and always maintaining a upward spiral learning around all sorts of situations. Now, you can probably note from the book that I've written, I'm using the All Blacks, the great New Zealand rugby team. I'm an Australian, and I guess I guess if you can't beat them, you learn from them. That's my view. And I know, apologies to any Kiwis, but I mean it's true. They've got an 83% success rate in the world of sport. It's an incredible success rate. But if you look at their team, and I've done that from a learning point of view, you'll find that they do bridging, buffering, and building very, very effectively. And in fact, in my book, I talk about how they use these 8 characteristics as well. And so I'm giving sporting analogies as well. So folks, do you have any questions, any comments, any observations that you might like to ask in relation to the model that I'm sharing with you at the moment? I'm more than happy to try and do what I can to explain that in the brief time that we've got left. Okay. Well, if I see the screen light up, I will attend to it immediately. So, if I could just a little plug, if I may, just to finish up, special offer for you, and my offer to you is simply this: if you pre-order Winning Teams, applying the All Blacks formula to your team, $30. If you pre-order that, I can send you an invoice. What I will do, and I've already got this set up, and people are still doing this now, you'll receive a free online course on building highly effective teams. The course is valued at $675, so happy to give you that on the basis of your payment for one book. So all you've got to do, it's a very simple process, is send me an email. There it is. Do that by the close of business today, and I will make sure that I'll send you an invoice, obviously, and once that's paid, I'll just send you a link to an online course, and you can learn a little bit more about some of the things that I've been talking about today, and some of the things around evaluating your team. So that's my offer, so take advantage of it. I'll be sending out, as I said, the recording and the slides later on today. And of course, the offer will be there in the recording and the slides as well. So thank you, folks. That's about it for me, unless there's any other questions. I guess in our online world now, we'll be doing more and more of this, and people like me have to learn to adapt, and that's how we're going to be doing more and more of these sorts of things. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity of tuning in. I hope you found it useful. I hope you found give you a little bit of an insight into how you can really build team identity in a very focused and a very effective way. So thanks, everyone. I wish you all the best, and I would say to you, have a wonderful weekend, albeit indoors. Have a great weekend, and we'll catch you soon. And thank you for tuning in, and all the very best. Thank you and goodbye.